Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our session today. This is session 11 of the Indiana 211 Universities, and my name is Jill Shimon, and I am a Community Engagement Coordinator for Indiana 211. My fellow Community Engagement Coordinator, Sherry Bowers-Duker, will be our speaker today, and she is going to get started here in just a minute. Before we begin, I'd like to share the link to the survey for the session so that we can get your feedback after today. If you are earning CEUs by attending today's session, you will need to complete the survey. And the link is there on the screen, and I will also put it in the chat. And it will also show up the end. But if you could probably click on it now in the chat and open it up before the end, that would be great. That way you won't miss the link. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Sherry to go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Jill. So today is the second of 5 presentations where we will share county level data with you from 211 calls. For these presentations, we are using the 5 regions that the Department of Health's Division of Nutrition and Physical Activity uses for their Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement Program, or LFPA. Today, we will cover the Northeast region, which includes LaGrange, Steuben, Noble, DeKalb, Kosciuszko, Whitley, Allen, Wabash, Huntington, Wells, Adams, Grant, Blackford, Jay, Madison, Delaware, Randolph, and Henry counties. Some, but not all of the data that I will be sharing today can be found on the data dashboard on our website. So like with last month's presentation, after I share that regional data today, I will also do a brief refresher on how to access and utilize the data dashboard. And then as I am presenting today, if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A section here in Zoom, and Jill will monitor those questions and let me know when questions come in, and I can go ahead and address those as we go. Otherwise, we will have some time at the end for additional questions as well. So all of the data I will be presenting today will be for the full year of 2024. And our first graph shows the total number of calls received in 2024 for each of those 18 counties, as well as the number of distinct callers and the number of referrals made to callers in those counties. You'll notice that the distinct caller counts are the smallest counts for each county, and that's because those represent each individual caller, and many people call more than once. So their multiple calls are counted in the total call count, but they are just counted once as a distinct caller. And then you will also notice that the number of referrals is the largest count for each county, and that's because our community navigators do provide at least 3 referrals for each need that a single caller has, if possible. And as you can see, the counts for several of these counties are very small, and it's hard to tell what they are on this graph, but you can find those exact counts on the data dashboard. And then of these 18 counties, Allen County by far had the greatest number of calls, distinct callers, and referrals, with over 44,000 referrals in 2024, followed by Madison County with almost 13,000 referrals, and Delaware County with about 11,000 referrals. And then Grant County had almost 4,000 referrals, and Kosciuszko had about 3,000 referrals. And for reference, the entire state of Indiana in 2024 received over 174,000 calls from over 117,000 distinct callers, and we made almost 570,000 referrals. So Allen County alone makes up about 7 to 8% of those total calls, callers, and referrals. And then this graph shows the percentage of 2024 calls from various need categories for each county. And I've included the top 3 need categories that we receive calls for, which are housing, utility assistance, and food and meals, as well as 2 other need categories that do not receive as many calls, but that agencies are often interested in learning more about. And those are transportation and mental health and substance use disorder. You'll notice this graph also includes Indiana in addition to the 18 region 2 counties, so we can compare the percentages to the full state average as well. We can see that of these 5 need categories, housing shows up in the greatest percentage of calls for almost every county, as well as for Indiana as a whole. The counties that have a higher percentage of housing calls than the state include Adams, Delaware, Huntington, Kosciuszko, LaGrange, Madison, Noble, Steuben, and Wabash. And for Blackford and Randolph counties, utility assistance was actually a greater need in 2024 than housing. And in Jay County, the percentage of housing and utility assistance calls were nearly equivalent. For most counties, the second highest need is utility assistance, followed by food and meals. But for DeKalb and Whitley counties, and for the state as a whole, there is a less than 1% difference between the percentage of utility assistance and food and meals calls. And then among these 18 counties, there are only 6 that did not have a higher percentage of transportation calls than the state as a whole. And those were Allen, DeKalb, Delaware, Henry J, and Randolph. So all the rest did have a higher need for transportation. And so we have a lot of transportation needs in this group of counties compared to the state as a whole. And then about half of these counties had a higher percentage of mental health and SUD calls than the state as a whole. And those include DeKalb, Delaware, Grant, Henry, Kosciuszko, LaGrange, Madison, Steuben, and Whitley. This graph shows the percentage of 2024 calls with unmet needs for those same 5 need categories. So we consider a need to be unmet during a call if a community navigator who answers the 211 calls is unable to provide a referral for that need. This data represents unmet needs that occurred for 3 reasons. The first is that the service the caller needed was unavailable in their area. The second is that the caller is ineligible for all resources available in their area. And the third reason that a need may be unmet is if the caller has exhausted existing resources, meaning they have already been referred to all of the available resources they're eligible for, and they are in need of some additional resources. For 11 of these 18 counties, the greatest unmet need for 2024 was utility assistance, which is different than the full state trend of having transportation as the greatest unmet need. The only counties in this group that did not have a greater percentage of calls with a utility assistance unmet need than Indiana as a whole were Adams, Delaware, Henry, and Wells counties. And then the counties that had a greater percentage of calls with a transportation unmet need than Indiana as a whole include Adams, Henry, Jay, Kosciuszko, LaGrange, and Randolph counties. And then in Henry, Huntington, and Wells counties, the greatest unmet need for 2024 was for housing resources. And there is more unmet needs data available on our data dashboard, which I will talk about towards the end of the presentation for anyone who missed last month's presentation. And then I will also talk about how we use this data to identify new resources for our database and how you all may be able to help with that process as well. So the remainder of the graphs will show data from the demographics and social determinants of health questions that our community navigators ask 211 callers to help them better identify which resources they will be eligible for, as well as what additional needs the caller may have that they can also provide referrals for. So it's important to note that 211 callers are not required to answer any of these questions if they do not feel comfortable doing so. So keep in mind that there is some missing data and that these percentages only reflect the responses we did receive. And that is why the categories for any given county add up to less than 100%. So this first graph shows the percentage of 2024 callers who identified with each sex category in each county and the state as a whole. There were more female than male callers in every county and in the whole state. The counties that had a higher percentage of female callers than Indiana as a whole include Adams, Blackford, Delaware, Huntington, LaGrange, Madison, and Noble. This graph shows the percentage of 2024 callers from various age ranges. We can see that in 13 of the 18 counties and for the state as a whole, the age group with the largest percentage of callers was 31 to 45 years old. In Blackford County, the age group with the highest percentage of callers was 60 years and older. And in Huntington, Jay, Kosciuszko, and Randolph counties, the age group with the highest percentage of callers was 46 to 60 years old. The collective outlier here is the younger than 18 age group, with every county and the state having less than 2% of callers from this age group. While youth callers are much less common, we do receive some calls from youth looking for resources. This graph shows the percentage of 2024 callers with various housing situations. In every county here and the state as a whole, the largest group was those who had housing at the time of their 211 call. Although it is worth noting that every county had less than 42% of their callers say that they had housing, and 9 of the 18 counties had 30% or less of their callers say that they had housing. The second largest group for all counties and the state as a whole was those who had housing and were worried about losing it in the future. In Kosciuszko County, the difference between the percentage of callers who had stable housing and percentage of callers who had housing and were worried about losing it in the future was just less than 1%. Um, in this group of counties, the percentage of callers who were facing eviction ranged from 2% to 13%. The percentage of callers with no housing ranged from less than 4% to 13%. The percentage of callers who had housing and were worried about losing it in the future ranged from 8% to 24%, and the percentage of callers who had stable housing ranged from 16% to 41%. This graph shows the percentage of 2024 callers from various race categories. For the state as a whole, about 33.4% of callers identified as white, while 29.4% identified as Black. We can see that this group of counties varies greatly from that state trend, with most counties having a much larger gap in callers from these two racial groups. 13 of the 18 counties had more than 50% of callers identify as white and less than 4% of callers identify as Black. In Allen County, 31% of callers identified as Black, while 28% of callers identified as white. This graph shows the percentage of 2024 callers from various employment categories. This is another social determinant of health where the trend for this group of counties is a little different than the state trend. For Indiana as a whole, the largest group was those who were unemployed and looking for work, with that being 15.7% of callers, closely followed by those who were unable to work due to being disabled. However, those who were unable to work due to being disabled was actually the largest group of callers for 11 of the 18 counties here, ranging from 5% to 21% of the callers. And the percentage of callers who were unemployed and looking for work ranged from 7% to 18%. And then I also want to note that DeKalb County actually had a larger percentage of callers who were employed full time than callers from all other categories except unable to work due to being disabled. And then lastly, Indiana as a whole and all of these counties had a greater percentage of callers who were employed full time than callers who were employed part time. This graph shows the percentage of 2024 callers from preferred language categories. For Indiana as a whole and every county here, the percentage of callers whose preferred language was English ranged from 46% to 100%. Counties with a notable amount of callers whose preferred language was Spanish include Allen, Kosciuszko, Madison, and Noble counties. And you'll notice the small sliver of green above Indiana and also above um, Allen County. Let's see. Yes, and that indicates that we do also receive some calls from individuals whose preferred language is one other than English or Spanish. So this is a good time to remind everyone that our community navigators do have access to a service that allows them to connect with interpreters for over 240 languages. So we are able to assist those individuals as well. And then additionally, something that Jill reminded us in our last presentation is that on our website at in211.org, there is a Google Translate option at the top that allows individuals to translate the entire website and search for online resources in that language as well. This graph shows the percentage of 2024 callers from various annual household income ranges. For Indiana as a whole and every county here, the largest group of callers is those with an annual household income of less than 15,000, ranging from 17% of callers to 42% of callers. For every county, the trend seems to be that the higher the income range, the lower the percentage of callers from that range. And then this is our last graph for today, and this shows the percentage of 2024 callers with various highest education levels. For Indiana as a whole and every county here, the largest group of callers was those whose highest level of education is high school, and that ranged from 17% of callers to 44% of callers. The second largest group for almost all counties was those whose highest level of education is junior high, ranging from 5% to 19% of callers. And then for Blackford County, the second largest group was actually those who had completed a trade or certification, and that was about 11% of callers. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, some of the data I presented today and much more data can be found on our interaction data dashboard. So I also wanted to remind everyone how to access that. On our website at in211.org, you would go to the Data tab and then click on Data Dashboard. And then after exploring the data dashboard, if you cannot find the data that you're looking for, we also have a data requests page that explains how you can request additional data from us as well.
So if you do have a question, if you would kindly type it into the Q&A tab rather than raise your hand. that would be great. We don't have audio for the audience, so please type your question in the Q&A and I will read it out loud and Sherry or I can answer that. And while we wait, Sherry, I, are you, I wanted to ask if you could give information or just a general overview, if you have it available, for some of the additional types of needs callers called about, um, above and beyond the top five that we typically see. Um, I know you touched on some of the persons with disabilities that will had jobs, but I didn't know if we could find whether or not we received calls or what the volume of calls might be for other types of needs. And I know I'm putting you on the spot because this is a
Yeah, so we certainly do have data on the types of services, the other types of services that we refer people to besides those five that I mentioned. And that is available on our data dashboard. I do not have those numbers handy today. We just kind of narrowed it down to those five. But yeah, the data dashboard that I'm about to give a refresher on, you can find all that data on there. And then, as I mentioned, you can always request additional data from us as well. And then Jill, I do think since we're in the same room, I think there might be an echo when we're both unmuted. If um, you could mute yourself while I'm talking. Thank you. There is at least an echo for me. All right. Okay, so getting back to the data dashboard here. So we have gone in depth on how to use the data dashboard in previous sessions. So those recordings are available on our website. But since I presented county level data in today's session, I wanted to remind everyone that county level data can also be found on the data dashboard. You can hover over a county that appears in the Indiana map on the dashboard to see some county specific metrics, or you can click on the county to filter the entire dashboard to display data for just that county. So then you could see all of the demographic data for just that county, as well as data on the types of needs and unmet needs that are most prevalent in that county. Also, for anyone who did attend last month's 211 University session, I need to correct something that I said. So, someone asked whether it was possible to select multiple counties at once on this map on the dashboard. And originally I said no, but I have since learned that it is possible. So, to select multiple counties, you just have to hold down your mouse and highlight all of the counties that you want to include, and then it'll filter the dashboard for that group of counties. Um, and then there are more specific instructions on the dashboard user guide that appears at the top of the data dashboard page as well. That kind of explains some different ways you can filter out the dashboard that might not be easy to figure out. All right, and then I also wanted to remind everyone that the dashboard can be filtered by a specific agency as well. So you can see all of that same data for a single agency listed in the Indiana 211 database. This can be beneficial if you're interested in seeing caller data from referrals made to your agency or to another agency of interest. And since I presented on some unmet needs data, I also wanted to talk about how we address those unmet needs for anyone who did not hear me talk about this last month. So, after identifying what the unmet needs are from caller data each month, we also identify which counties those needs are most unmet in. And then our community engagement and resource curation teams dedicate time to identifying new resources that we may be able to add to the database to help meet some of those unmet needs. We do this by conducting searches, but also by reaching out to community partners who may be able to provide valuable information. Among the unmet needs data shared today or the data you may discover on our interaction dashboard, if you ever notice there are significant unmet needs for a type of resource you are familiar with in your community, we would appreciate you sharing some information about those resources with us. You can use the guided search on our website to identify whether certain resources are already listed in our database. The best way to do that is to go to in211.org, and right on the homepage, you will see a list of service categories to choose from. If you select the advanced search option, then you can use the keyword search to search for a specific agency and see if their services are listed in the database. And then this guided search feature is also earlier when I mentioned that our website has the Google Translate option. This search feature can be translated as well. So if someone was searching for resources and clicked on one of these categories, all of the results would be translated in the language they selected as well. And then if you are aware of any services that are not already listed in the database, if they are your own agency's services, then you can complete the resource listing request form on our website at in211.org. All of our forms can be found on that page. You would just go to the Join the Database tab and click on Resource Request to add to 211 database. And if you're aware of services offered by another agency that would be a good addition to the database, you can either direct that agency to that listing request form, or you can send us an email and let us know. And our email is in211info@fssa.in.gov. So if you just let us know, then we will reach out to them and discuss their services with them. All right, so that's all of the information I had to present to you today. So I will go ahead and pass it back to Jill to talk about the upcoming session. But if you have any questions about anything I presented on, go ahead and put those in the Q&A section.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. So we do have a couple of questions. One is someone asked, which languages are you primarily seeing in these counties other than Spanish? It looked to me from the slide that Haitian Creole was another. But to answer your question, when a caller calls and speaks with a navigator, they can be connected to translators for over 240 languages. They also can now go to the in211.org in the guided search on the primary page, and from the drop down, select a language that they need to translate to, and the entire page will translate as well. And that is the case on the in211.org page, as well as the FSSA pages for other agencies. So I don't know that I completely answered your question, but again, the common ones have always been Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Burmese around the state.
Yeah, so in terms of the data that we're seeing for languages, if you notice on the graph, there were other languages listed in the key, but you couldn't see them on the graph because we do receive such a low percentage of calls from the other languages. So we definitely see English and Spanish the most, but as Jill mentioned, Haitian Creole is probably the next one that shows up. I would have to look, but I know that's one of the next highest, but still the percentage of calls that we receive from individuals who prefer that language is much, much lower than English and Spanish.
Okay. Our next question is, I'm curious if you get information from community partners on whether they use the 211 data to help identify what the needs are for their counties, such as housing, food, etc.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so we do receive communication from agencies who say that they are utilizing our data dashboard and find that helpful. Sometimes it's helpful to see what needs are unmet in your community and what types of programs your community could use more of. And then we also do receive a good number of data requests as well. So I mentioned that if you're looking for data that's not on the dashboard, you can send us an email to our data email to request additional data. And we do get probably at least a couple requests each month. And so agencies are using that data to kind of guide the work that they do and the programs that they're developing as well.
And so the follow-up to that is so how do they use the data to enhance services in the local areas? And I guess it's more about when they determine that there's an unmet need, they might do things like have a health fair, for example, or a resource fair, um, add some services to their existing um, agency. And so then we're going to update their listing with us accordingly. Sherry, I don't know if you have any input on that question.
Yeah, so I would say from what I hear from the agencies that request data from us, they're most interested in seeing the types of resources that people are asking for. And so whether that be to see whether those needs are being met or unmet so they can determine whether they need more of those types of services. So I would say that's definitely the main one. But we do have community partners who are interested in our demographic and social determinants of health data as well. That way they can see which populations are calling in, which populations are not calling in based on who they know is present in their community. And that way they can target those populations for awareness. And so we do have some demographic interest for those reasons as well.
We did have a question earlier with regard to, and I missed, I have to say, I missed this part of when you were speaking about the demographics and the level of income for our callers. So the question is, what do you mean by the trend in income being the higher the range of income, the less people? Does that mean the higher income, the less apt they are to call us? Is that?
Right. Yeah. So if you look at the graph for the higher income ranges, so the like over the annual household income of over 50,000 a year had much less callers than the lower income groups. So our highest um, group was less than 15,000 a year. That group had the highest number of callers for every county that I showed and for the state as a whole. And then when you go to the next highest income level, so I think it was 15,000 to 25 or 30,000, then that had lower callers. And then you go to the next highest income level that had even lower callers. And so that was sort of the trend across the board there.
Perfect. Thank you. I knew you'd be able to explain it way better than I could. Um, I don't see any more questions. Just a real quick, our next session is not going to be the third Wednesday. It's going to be the fourth Wednesday in June. So please join us on Wednesday, June 25th at 10 a.m. And we are going to cover the central region of the state, which is Boone, Hamilton, Putnam, Hendricks, Marion, our busiest county, I would say by far, Hancock, Morgan, Johnson, and Shelby. So that, again, that's Wednesday, June 25th, and you'll get some kind of announcement reminder with the link after today's session, probably later this week, and then again a few days before the next session. And finally, the next slide, Sherry, here again is our link to the survey. If you would kindly do us a favor and complete the survey. Your feedback is essential in making sure that we're giving you the information you need from us, as well as getting those CEUs for those that need it. Here's our information for the community engagement team, our email address, and our toll-free number, 888-439-6357. And I mentioned to one of the attendees that was looking for additional data on the types of calls we receive from folks for disabilities, what kinds of needs they might be calling about. Please do send me that email and you and I can get together and speak about that more in depth. And with that, I will say thank you again for joining us. And I hope that you found this information helpful.